What if I told you there was a boy born in 1867? A boy who defied every law of medicine, every boundary of science, and left doctors questioning the very limits of human life itself. A boy whose existence to this day remains a mystery no one can explain. Tonight, we uncover the case of Timothy Caldwell, the child who broke the rules of nature itself. What was he? A miracle, or a mystery science could never solve? In the quiet countryside of Massachusetts in the late 19th century, an ordinary family welcomed a child into the world. But from the very first breath, it was clear this was no ordinary child. His body healed faster than it should. His eyes glowed in ways no human should. And his heartbeat, when measured, was unlike anything doctors had ever heard. This is the hauntingly true story of Timothy Caldwell, the boy who made scientists, priests, and skeptics question everything they knew about life itself, have been entirely human. The story leaves us questioning, was he a divine anomaly, a scientific mutation, or something far beyond human understanding? In the year 1867, deep in the quiet farmlands of Massachusetts, something extraordinary was about to happen. The air that night was unnaturally still. Not even the wind dared to move the tall grass that surrounded the Caldwell family farmhouse. Inside, a young woman named Martha Caldwell clutched the edges of her bed, drenched in sweat, her cries echoing through the wooden walls. Her husband, Thomas Caldwell, paced anxiously, the old midwife shouting instructions over the crackling of the fire. It was supposed to be a normal birth, another child in a hard-working family's growing household. But from the moment Timothy took his first breath, nothing about him was normal. When the baby emerged, the midwife froze. Her eyes widened, her mouth parted slightly, and she stepped back as though she had seen a ghost. The child's skin was pale, almost translucent, glowing faintly in the dim light of the oil lamps. His eyes opened immediately, unlike any newborn, and instead of the usual soft, unfocused gaze of an infant, his eyes locked directly onto his mother's. Martha later swore that in that instant, she felt something move through her, not fear, but a strange calm. As if the baby's presence quieted everything around her, Thomas leaned over to see his newborn son, and his heart stuttered. The baby didn't cry. He simply stared, his small chest rising and falling slowly, rhythmically, almost too perfectly. The midwife, trembling, whispered a prayer under her breath. "It's not natural," she muttered. But Thomas dismissed her words, wrapping the infant gently in a wool blanket. The boy's body was strangely cool to the touch, as though he had been born not of blood and warmth, but of something else entirely. By morning, the story had already begun to spread. In small towns like those, nothing remained secret for long. The local preacher came to bless the child, and the neighbors whispered of omens and divine signs. Some claimed they'd seen an unusual light flickering above the Caldwell farmhouse the night before, a faint, bluish glow that danced across the clouds, though the sky had been clear. Others said they heard a low hum, like the sound of bees trapped inside a bottle, that continued until dawn. As days turned into weeks, the Caldwell family realized their son was different in more ways than one. Timothy rarely cried, rarely slept, and never fell ill. His body temperature was lower than it should have been, something the town doctor couldn't understand. He would check the baby's pulse, frowning as he pressed his ear to the tiny chest. The rhythm was slow. Too slow, yet steady. "He's alive," the doctor would say, puzzled. "But I can't explain this." By his first birthday, Timothy began to show signs of intelligence far beyond his age. He could recognize faces, follow voices, and even mimic sounds. His eyes were sharp, piercing blue with faint silver rings that seemed to shift under the light. Martha often found him staring at the sky for hours, silent, motionless, as though he were listening to something beyond human hearing. One night, as Thomas returned home late, he found Timothy sitting up in his crib, humming a low, strange tune, a tune Thomas swore he'd never heard before. Yet it stirred a deep unease within him. The town began to talk. Some said the boy was blessed by God, others said he was cursed. The preacher called him a sign, though he could not say of what. Rumors began to draw visitors, curious doctors, scientists, even clergymen who wanted to witness the boy who didn't cry, didn't sleep, and seemed to know when people were watching him. The first man to come from outside town was Dr. Henry Wallace, a physician from Boston known for his fascination with rare medical cases. When he examined Timothy, he noted several strange things. The boy's pupils didn't contract normally under light. His veins seemed to glow faintly beneath his skin in dark rooms. And most curiously, his heartbeat produced a faint harmonic sound, as though two hearts were beating in sync. Dr. Wallace's notes from that visit still survive in fragments today, found decades later in a sealed chest at Harvard Medical Archives. He wrote, "The child appears normal in structure, but there is a resonance to his body, an energy field of sorts. I cannot describe it scientifically, but I feel it when I am near him. The boy emits a hum, a vibration, faint yet constant. I am drawn to it, though it unsettles me." After the doctor's visit, more strange events began to occur in the Caldwell home. Clocks stopped working when Timothy entered the room. Candles flickered and went out when he cried. Even the family's livestock reacted to him. Horses refused to come near him. Dogs barked without reason, and chickens would scatter whenever he appeared in the barnyard. His mother, torn between love and fear, tried to keep him hidden from prying eyes. But word had already spread too far. By the time Timothy was 5, he became something of a local legend. Some people would travel for miles to catch a glimpse of him, to see the boy who glowed. But Timothy never enjoyed the attention. He preferred solitude, wandering into the woods near his home, disappearing for hours, sometimes returning with strange objects, smooth stones that hummed faintly when placed near fire, or feathers that shimmered under moonlight. His parents asked where he found them, and he would only smile and whisper, "They find me." As the years went on, scientists tried to offer explanations. They spoke of rare medical conditions, pigmentation anomalies, even nerve disorders. But none could explain why Timothy's wounds healed instantly when he cut himself, or why his reflection in mirrors appeared delayed, as though time itself hesitated before catching up to him. In 1867, science was limited. There were no advanced machines, no modern diagnostics. All they had were their senses, and every one of them told the same story. Timothy. Caldwell defied everything they knew about biology. Neighbors began to fear the family. One night, a group of men came to the Caldwell home, demanding to see the boy. They claimed he was a witch, a creature born of unnatural forces. Thomas refused them entry, but the men left a warning scratched on the family's barn: "Not of man, not of God." Martha wept that night, holding Timothy close, feeling his cold skin against hers, whispering prayers until dawn. But Timothy didn't cry. He never did. He looked at his mother with those unblinking eyes, eyes that seemed to see not just her face, but her thoughts. And then, for the first time, he spoke a complete sentence. His voice was calm, distant, and almost melodic. "Don't be afraid, Mother. They'll understand one day." From that moment, Martha knew that whatever her son was, he wasn't evil. He wasn't a monster. He was something beyond the reach of fear, something science, religion, and reason had no language for. And as the months passed, more people came, drawn not by curiosity anymore, but by something they couldn't explain, a pull, an unspoken connection that every person who met Timothy seemed to feel. The year was 1867, a time when America was rebuilding after war, when science was still in its infancy and faith often clashed with reason. And in the midst of it all, a single child was born who would make both question their foundations. A child who should have been ordinary, yet carried in his very existence a question that no one, not even the brightest minds of the age, could answer: who or what? was Timothy Caldwell by the time Timothy Caldwell turned 8 years old. Whispers about him had spread far beyond the quiet Massachusetts countryside. What began as local gossip had grown into something much larger, an unsolved curiosity that drew doctors, scholars, and even priests from distant cities. To the people of his town, Timothy was either a miracle or an omen, depending on who you asked. But to the scientific minds who came to study him, he was something far more intriguing, a living impossibility. First true scientific examination of Timothy took place in the spring of 1875. The Caldwells had reluctantly agreed to bring their son to Boston after a letter arrived from the Massachusetts Institute of Medicine offering both compensation and confidentiality. For Thomas and Martha, the offer was tempting. Years of isolation and fear had worn them down. Maybe, just maybe, someone could explain what their son really was. When the family arrived in Boston, they were met by a team of physicians led by Dr. Jonathan Hawley, a man known for his rigid skepticism and obsession with rationality. Hawley didn't believe in miracles, and certainly not in rumors of glowing skin or voices that could calm storms, as some newspapers had suggested. But the moment he met Timothy, even Hale's scientific certainty began to tremble. Timothy stood quietly in the examination room, his small frame wrapped in a dark wool coat. The gas lamps above flickered slightly, and Hawley noticed something strange every time he approached the boy. His instruments would distort. The mercury inside his thermometer rose and fell without explanation. His pocket watch stopped ticking when he stepped too close. And when he pressed his stethoscope against Timothy's chest, the doctor froze. The heartbeat wasn't normal. It wasn't even close. It was too even, too rhythmic, producing a faint, harmonic sound, as though there were two pulses synchronized in perfect unison. Hawley removed the stethoscope, checked it, then tried again. The sound returned, vibrating faintly through the device, echoing like the hum of a tuning fork. Timothy looked up at him with calm, curious eyes, and Hawley realized the sound grew louder when the boy made eye contact. The first written records of Timothy's physiology describe a series of impossibilities. His blood temperature measured significantly lower than that of any healthy human. His pupils didn't contract under bright light. His skin showed no signs of sweat, even under heat. But the most astonishing discovery came when one of the doctors pricked his finger for a blood sample. Within seconds, the small wound closed completely, leaving no mark behind. The doctors exchanged glances, their curiosity turning into something closer to disbelief. When they examined the drop of blood under a microscope, their confusion deepened. Timothy's blood cells seemed to behave abnormally. They pulsed faintly, like living light, expanding and contracting as though responding to unseen frequencies. One physician swore he saw the cells form patterns, geometric alignments that shifted like ripples on water. They assumed it was a trick of the lens, but when Dr. Hawley observed the same thing, he felt his confidence begin to crumble. Days turned into weeks as the examinations continued. Timothy underwent numerous tests, some harmless, some invasive. He never cried, never resisted, only watched the doctors with a strange serenity that unsettled them. When they drew his blood, he would faintly hum a low note, and sometimes the instruments in the room would vibrate in response, creating an eerie harmony no one could explain. At night, when the boy slept in the hospital quarters, the nurses reported strange phenomena. The temperature in his room dropped noticeably. Candles would extinguish without wind. The glass panes on the window would fog from the inside, though no moisture was found. And sometimes faint blue light would leak from beneath the door, glowing softly until dawn. Dr. Hawley began keeping personal notes that he never intended for publication. In one entry dated April 3, 1875, he wrote, "There is something in this boy's presence that defies natural law. He radiates a quiet vibration. I feel it in my chest when I stand near him. Instruments fail, compasses spin, and even my own pulse seems to slow when he looks at me. It is not fear that grips me, but awe. When Holly attempted to take X-ray-like images using early photographic exposure methods, the results were inexplicable. Timothy's outline appeared faintly on the glass plate, but instead of bones, his body emitted soft concentric rings of light patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if nature had drawn a design unknown to mankind. Holly compared the images to magnetic field lines and wrote, "It is as though the boy's body generates its own invisible structure, a kind of internal geometry." Word of these findings leaked despite Hale's insistence on secrecy. Newspapers began calling Timothy the boy that science couldn't explain. Public curiosity exploded. People speculated that he was an angel, an experiment, or even a child born from celestial forces. The church grew uneasy, accusing Holly of interfering with divine will. The government grew curious. 2 agents visited the institute, demanding that all documents regarding the boy's case be turned over. Dr. Holly refused, and within days his funding was abruptly cut off. Meanwhile, Timothy began changing in subtle ways. His hair turned almost white despite his young age. His eyes grew brighter, reflecting light in strange hues of silver and blue. He began hearing things others could not. He once told his mother, "The earth hums when people lie." No one understood what that meant, but Holly believed Timothy's senses extended beyond the physical. The boy's physical resilience continued to defy logic. When he accidentally burned his hand on a lamp, the skin healed in seconds, leaving no scar. When he fell from a height that would have broken bones, he stood up without pain. Hale's team tried to analyze the secret behind his tissue regeneration, but every test failed to provide answers. The tissue samples they took dissolved into dust within hours, as though they were never organic to begin with. The psychological evaluations were just as confounding. Timothy scored far beyond his age in comprehension, pattern recognition, and abstract thinking. He could recall entire paragraphs from books after a single glance. Once, when Holly placed a mechanical pocket watch before him and asked how it worked, Timothy disassembled and reassembled it perfectly in minutes, though no one had ever taught him mechanics. When asked how he knew, he simply said, "It speaks when I listen." Holly began to believe that Timothy's mind was somehow tuned to something greater, a frequency beyond the human spectrum of thought. He speculated that the boy's entire body functioned as a kind of biological receiver, constantly syncing with energies no other living thing could detect. But as Holly became more obsessed with uncovering the truth, Timothy began to withdraw. He grew quieter, distant. He spent long hours staring out the window of his hospital room, watching the clouds drift by, sometimes whispering things no one could understand. One nurse claimed she heard him say, "It's getting closer." When she asked what he meant, Timothy turned to her with those shimmering eyes and replied, "The sound." As his presence in Boston grew, so did fear. Some of the doctors refused to work with him. They said they heard whispers when he entered the room, voices that weren't his. One claimed that every time Timothy touched a surface, frost would appear for a split second, even in the middle of summer. Holly dismissed these as paranoia, but he too began to feel unease. His dreams were haunted by strange geometric patterns, the same shapes he had seen in Timothy's blood under the microscope. The boy's tests continued until one evening in late June, when everything changed. During a particularly intense observation, Holly tried to measure the electrical activity in Timothy's body using a crude galvanic setup. The moment the device touched his skin, the room lights flickered violently and a loud hum filled the air. Every metallic object vibrated, glass cracked, and the doctors were thrown backward as if by a shockwave. When the commotion settled, Timothy stood unharmed in the center of the room, surrounded by a faint blue aura that faded slowly until nothing remained. The instruments were fried, the room scorched, and Holly realized he had crossed a line that science should never have stepped over. After that day, the experiments were stopped. The Caldwell family took Timothy home under strict instructions, never to allow further testing. Hale continued to study his notes in secret, trying to understand the phenomenon he had witnessed. But one thing haunted him more than anything else during the moment of the electrical surge. He swore he heard a voice inside his own head, not speaking, but resonating. A sound like Timothy's hum, whispering one single word: awakening. From that moment on, Holly knew the boy wasn't merely an anomaly of nature. He was a question that medicine, physics, and even faith could not begin to answer. A body that didn't obey the rules of flesh and blood. A living contradiction wrapped in the shape of a child, who seemed to exist on the edge between life as we know it and something infinitely greater, something that science could not name by. The time Timothy Caldwell reached the age of 10, he was no longer just a boy. He'd become a phenomenon, a living puzzle that fascinated some and terrified others. Scientists spoke his name in private meetings. Clergymen warned their congregations against the danger of tampering with creation, and journalists began calling him the boy science couldn't explain. His family had hoped that bringing him back to their small town would restore peace, but peace was a luxury Timothy could never have. The eyes of the world, both curious and fearful, were now fixed upon him. When Dr. Jonathan Hale's early reports leaked into scientific circles, they stirred both admiration and outrage. His description of Timothy's strange hums, his bodies, electrical discharges, and the mysterious geometric blood patterns spread through universities and research halls like wildfire. Most dismissed it as exaggeration, but a few brilliant, if reckless, minds wanted proof. They wrote letters to the Caldwells, offering money, safety, and secrecy, anything to study the child. Among them was Dr. Elias Rourke, a neurologist whose fascination with the mind had already drawn criticism for his unethical experiments. When Holly refused to collaborate, Rourke decided to find Timothy himself. It was the autumn of 1877 when Dr. Rourke and 2 assistants arrived unannounced at the Caldwell farmhouse. The air outside was thick with the scent of rain, and thunder rolled across the hills as they knocked at the door. Thomas Caldwell was reluctant to let them in, but Rourke's words were smooth, persuasive. He claimed he only wanted to observe, to help explain Timothy's gift. He could be the key to understanding human evolution, he said. You owe it to him to know the truth. Against their better judgment, and desperate for answers after years of confusion, the Caldwells allowed it. Timothy was sitting by the fire when Rourke entered the room. The boy looked up slowly, as if he already knew who had come for him. His silver blue eyes flickered faintly in the firelight, and Rourke froze in place, overwhelmed by the quiet intensity of that gaze. You've come too soon, Timothy said softly, and for a moment, none of the men knew how to respond. Rourke set up his instruments, crude devices built to measure electrical impulses and brain activity. He placed thin metal rods along Timothy's arms and temples, connecting them to wires and small glass bulbs filled with mercury. The moment the setup was complete, the bulbs began to flicker, emitting faint pulses of light that synchronized perfectly with Timothy's heartbeat. The assistants gasped. Rourke's hands trembled as he wrote down readings that defied every known law of physics. The pulses weren't random, they formed patterns, repeating sequences like language written in light. Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder, and the instruments around the room started to fail one by one. The temperature dropped sharply. Thomas Caldwell urged Rourke to stop, but the doctor was consumed by his discovery. He leaned close to Timothy, his voice shaking with excitement. Do you know what you are, boy? He whispered. Timothy didn't answer at first. Then, in a calm tone, he said, something your machines will never understand. A moment later, every light in the room went out. The fireplace extinguished with a sudden gust, plunging the farmhouse into darkness. The wires on Rourke's devices sparked blue, and a sound filled the air, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't loud, but it pressed into the bones, vibrating through every surface. The assistants fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Rourke tried to stand, shouting for Timothy to stop, but the boys simply sat motionless, eyes open, glowing faintly like two cold stars. When the light finally returned, the room was a wreck. Every piece of glass had shattered, the instruments melted, and the smell of ozone lingered in the air. Rourke stared at the boy, pale and trembling. "He's not human," one assistant whispered. But Timothy only turned to his parents, his voice barely audible. "They're not ready yet." The next day, Rourke left the town in silence, carrying nothing but a small notebook. Its pages contained incomplete sketches, symbols he claimed to have seen floating in the air during the surge. Weeks later, those same symbols were found etched into the walls of his laboratory, drawn by an unknown hand. Rourke was found soon after, unresponsive, staring blankly at a wall, mumbling the same phrase over and over. "The sound never ends." As news of the incident reached Boston, the line between science and superstition began to blur. Some claimed Timothy was the next step in human evolution, a bridge between life and energy. Others believed he was a divine punishment, proof that mankind had reached too far into God's domain. Whatever people believed, one thing was certain: fear had taken root. The Caldwell's home became a place of isolation. Neighbors avoided them, priests refused to visit, and children were warned not to go near the property. But despite the growing fear around him, Timothy remained calm. He spent his days sketching strange circular patterns on pieces of parchment, symbols no one could decipher. He claimed they were songs, though no one could hear them. Sometimes he'd walk into the woods and vanish for hours, returning with leaves that shimmered faintly under moonlight. In early 1878, the government intervened. A discreet letter arrived from the Department of Scientific Affairs, requesting that Timothy be brought to Washington for examination. The family refused at first, but when soldiers appeared at their door days later, they had no choice. Timothy was taken to a secret facility on the outskirts of Boston, where he would undergo what officials called controlled study. Inside the facility, Timothy was placed in a specially constructed chamber lined with metal and glass. The lead researcher in charge was Colonel William Hawthorne, a man who believed the boy's abilities could be harnessed for military advancement. Unlike Dr. Hawley, who approached Timothy with awe, Hawthorne viewed him as a resource, something to be understood, contained, and used. The experiments resumed, more invasive this time. They tested his limits, exposing him to heat, cold, electrical currents, and isolation. Yet Timothy showed no distress, no pain, no emotion. The machines often malfunctioned in his presence, and one technician claimed that when Timothy closed his eyes, the entire room began to vibrate faintly, as if responding to his thoughts. They tried to sedate him, but every chemical failed. His body neutralized the compounds instantly. Then came the final experiment. Hawthorne ordered a high-voltage test, determined to measure Timothy's energy output. The boy was placed in the chamber, surrounded by wires and electrodes. The current surged, filling the room with blinding light. But instead of harm, something else happened. The energy bent around him, spiraling like a magnetic storm. The instruments recorded impossible readings before exploding one by one. The soldiers outside rushed in, but when the light faded, Timothy was gone. The chamber was empty, the air still humming. The metal walls bore intricate patterns. Geometric designs burned into the surface, identical to the symbols he had drawn as a child. Hawthorne and his men searched for hours, but there was no trace. The boy had vanished without sound or mark, leaving only a faint scent of ozone and a lingering vibration that made the glass tremble. When word of the disappearance spread, the government erased all records of the experiment. The official statement said the boy had died during testing, his remains destroyed in an accident. But Dr. Hiley, who had secretly been following the case, refused to believe it. He returned to the ruins of the facility weeks later and found something extraordinary, a small, smooth stone embedded in the floor, faintly humming with the same sound he had once heard in Timothy's chest. When Hale placed his hand on it, he felt warmth and a pulse. From that moment, Hale became obsessed again. He believed Timothy hadn't died at all, that he had transcended physical form, merging with something beyond human comprehension. But this belief came at a cost. As he continued his research, strange things began happening around him. Instruments behaved erratically, compasses spun wildly, and at night, he swore he could hear that same hum beneath the floorboards of his home. Others who had been involved in the project began disappearing too. Some were found wandering aimlessly, murmuring phrases about light and sound. Others were never seen again. The surviving records from that time are fragmented. But one recurring detail stands out: the reports of people hearing a faint hum in the distance whenever a storm rolled through Massachusetts. A hum that seemed to echo the rhythm of a heartbeat. It was around this time that whispers of possession began to resurface. Religious leaders claimed that the boy was never meant to exist, that his abilities came not from science, but from something darker. Others believed he was proof of divine intervention, an angel misinterpreted by man's limited understanding. But for those who had seen him, who had felt the hum in their bones and watched machines tremble at his presence, one truth became undeniable. Timothy Caldwell had shattered the boundaries between science and the unknown, leaving behind a fear that no one could name, and a silence that seemed to vibrate with unanswered questions the night Timothy Caldwell vanished. The sky over Massachusetts was unlike any the townspeople had ever seen. A storm gathered without warning, lightning without thunder, wind without sound. The air shimmered faintly, and for a few haunting moments, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Those who lived near the Caldwell farmhouse swore they saw strange lights above the valley, that night circles of faint blue radiance that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat in the heavens. Inside that modest wooden house, the boy science couldn't explain stood by the window, gazing out into the trembling darkness as if listening for something. Only he could hear. Thomas and Martha Caldwell were restless. It had been months since Timothy had returned home from the government facility, escorted quietly by officials who gave no explanation for where he had been or what had been done to him. But they could see it, something in him had changed. His eyes glowed brighter, his voice carried a strange resonance, and at times when he spoke, his words seemed to echo even in silence. He would wander outside during storms, barefoot, staring at the sky with his palms open as if feeling invisible rain. When Martha tried to stop him, he'd only whisper, "It's calling again." That evening, the storm began as a soft vibration under the earth. The lamps flickered, the horses neighed wildly, and the dogs refused to bark. Thomas went to check the windows, muttering about the weather, but what he saw outside made him freeze. In the distance, above the tree line, a faint column of blue light shot up toward the clouds, swirling and expanding like a pillar of smoke made of lightning. And then he heard it, the sound that had haunted his family for years, a low hum, deep and rhythmic, the sound that seemed to breathe through the earth itself. It was coming from inside the house. Martha ran upstairs to find Timothy standing at his bedroom door, his face calm, his silver blue eyes glowing brighter than ever. The hum filled the air, rattling the walls, shaking the floorboards. "It's time," Timothy said softly, his voice echoing as though it came from every direction. Martha reached for him, tears streaming down her face. "Time for what?" she cried. He looked at her with that same serene expression he'd worn since birth and whispered, "For the silence to end." Outside, lightning struck again and again, but without sound, each flash lighting the valley in ghostly brilliance. The air around the farmhouse grew thick, shimmering like heat on desert sand. Neighbors later said they saw the house surrounded by faint rings of light, concentric circles expanding outward in slow, perfect motion. Inside, Thomas tried to grab his son's arm, but his hand passed through something, an invisible barrier that felt like static. Timothy's hair lifted gently as though caught in a breeze no one else could feel. He stepped forward, barefoot on the wooden floor, and every step left behind a faint imprint of light that faded slowly after he moved. The humming grew louder, turning into a harmonic vibration that seemed to shake the entire valley. Dishes shattered, windows cracked, the clock stopped ticking. Martha screamed his name, but Timothy turned once more and said in a voice filled with calm certainty, "Don't be afraid. This isn't the end." The next moment, the world exploded in white light. When the neighbors arrived hours later, drawn by the glow that had turned night into day, the Caldwell farmhouse was gone. Nothing remained but scorched earth and a circle of ash where the structure had stood. There were no bodies, no debris, only a faint hum that lingered in the air like the echo of something ancient. The authorities arrived, puzzled and cautious. They assumed lightning had struck the home, igniting it completely, but even that didn't explain the missing remains. Wood, metal, even stone foundations had vanished without a trace. Dr. Jonathan Hawley returned to Massachusetts as soon as he heard the news. He had been living in near seclusion since the government shutdown of his earlier research, haunted by memories of Timothy and the impossible phenomena surrounding him. When he reached the site, he immediately felt a faint vibration under his feet, like a pulse hidden in the ground. The air smelled faintly of ozone. He knelt in the center of the scorched circle and found a single object embedded in the soil, a small metallic sphere, no larger than a marble, humming softly. Inside it, faint light pulsed in rhythmic intervals, steady, perfect, and unmistakably alive. Holly took the object back to his study and began his final journal entries, which historians would later call the Caldwell Papers. In them, he wrote that the sphere responded to human proximity, its glow intensifying when touched. He described hearing faint whispers, not in sound, but in the form of thoughts that weren't his own. The messages were fragmented, mathematical, sometimes resembling coordinates or wave frequencies. Hawley became convinced that the sphere was connected to Timothy, that it was somehow part of him. He wrote, "The boy did not die. He changed states. His body obeyed laws unknown to us. He is energy now, consciousness without flesh, a pattern without form." But Hawley wasn't the only one who believed the boy had transcended. In the years that followed, strange events continued to occur in the region. Locals reported hearing a low hum beneath the earth during storms. Cattle would behave erratically before lightning storms, moving in circles as if drawn by invisible forces. Travelers claimed to see flashes of blue light in the woods, shaped like the faint outline of a boy standing still in the rain. Some dismissed these as superstitions, but others swore the hum was real, that it could be felt deep within the chest like a second heartbeat. In 1885, 8 years after Timothy's disappearance, a group of Harvard researchers rediscovered fragments of Dr. Hale's notes and attempted to replicate his experiments. Using primitive electromagnetic instruments, they recorded strange anomalies in the Caldwell Valley, fluctuations in magnetic fields, localized bursts of energy, and unexplained light distortions. One researcher wrote, "It feels as though the air itself is remembering him." Their data vanished mysteriously when their lab caught fire weeks later, destroying nearly all evidence of the tests. Over time, the legend of Timothy Caldwell evolved from science into folklore. To some, he became a symbol of divine creation, a child sent to remind humanity that not all life can be measured or dissected. To others, he was the warning of what happens when science dares to cross into realms it cannot control. Parents told stories to their children of the boy who hummed to the storms, and travelers passing through the region left offerings near the old foundation stones where the Caldwell house once stood. Believing the ground itself still listened, Dr. Hawley spent the rest of his life chasing answers. He published nothing, but in his private journals, He described increasing encounters with phenomena similar to those surrounding Timothy, glowing geometric shapes appearing in mirrors, sounds that followed him even when he was alone, and moments where time seemed to pause for fractions of seconds. His final entry, written in shaky handwriting, read, "I hear it again tonight. The hum. It calls my name." He was found dead at his desk, the metallic sphere resting in his hand, still glowing faintly after all those years. In the century that followed, scattered references to Timothy appeared in obscure scientific archives. In 1923, a geophysicist named Dr. Eleanor Shaw reported strange readings while mapping magnetic anomalies near the same valley. She described pulses of energy that matched no known geological source, repeating every 12 seconds in perfect intervals. When she compared the waveform to historical audio reconstructions of electromagnetic frequencies, she found something chilling. The pattern matched the heartbeat Dr. Hawley had documented from Timothy's examinations decades earlier. Modern researchers have occasionally revisited the mystery, though most dismiss it as myth. Yet every few decades, reports surface again, stories of flickering lights in old Massachusetts farmlands, photographs showing faint silhouettes of a child standing in lightning, or recordings capturing that same low, resonant hum. Some even claim that Timothy's story predates his own birth, connecting him to ancient legends of beings who could manipulate energy and time, messengers between the material and the immaterial. Whether he was human, celestial, or something in between, Timothy Caldwell's existence forced science and faith to confront the same terrifying truth, that the universe still holds mysteries we are not meant to solve. The boy who never cried, who never aged like others, and who vanished into light, became more than a name lost to history. He became a question that still resonates through time, a vibration that never stopped moving, a heartbeat still echoing beneath the earth whenever thunder rolls through the Massachusetts sky. And so, the story of Timothy Caldwell, the boy science couldn't explain, remains one of the most haunting enigmas in history. A mystery that refused to fade, a question that neither religion nor reason could ever fully answer. Was Timothy a child born ahead of his time, a living bridge between human consciousness and forces beyond our understanding? Or was he something else entirely, a being not from this world, but merely passing through it? Every attempt to explain him, from medical science to electromagnetic theory, only led to more confusion, more questions, and more impossible coincidences. His disappearance left behind no body, no trace, only that faint hum, a whisper from the unknown that still lingers in the valley he once called home. Generations later, his legend endures not because people seek fear, but because they seek truth. A truth that reminds us that even in an age of logic, there are still places science cannot reach, where the fabric of existence bends and the impossible becomes real. Maybe, somewhere out there, beyond time and form, Timothy still exists, not as flesh but as energy, watching, waiting, vibrating in harmony with the cosmos that once called him home. If you felt the chill of this mystery and want to dive deeper into the world's most baffling and unsolved stories, make sure to subscribe to my channel, because what you've just heard is only the beginning.